Hi, and welcome to a new season of the Act React podcast, where we explore improvisation through conversations with remarkable artists. I'm the host, Daniel Burkholder, a dance artist based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and Potawatomi peoples. And I'm truly excited to share with you today's conversation with Chris Aiken. It's kind of perfect to have Chris kick off this new season, as he is one of the most prolific teachers and performers of improvisation in the modern, postmodern, contemporary dance field. He has thought a lot about improvisational performance and training, and we get into all of that here. This conversation is a wonderful way to set the stage for the coming season, which will be the most extensive Act React season yet. So stay tuned, as lots of great artists are coming our way. Before we jump into the conversation, here's a bit about Chris. Chris Aiken is a leading international teacher and performer of dance improvisation and contact improvisation. Over the last 4 decades, his work has evolved through ongoing investigations of performance, composition, ecology, movement technique, the perception, and design. Chris has performed and collaborated with many renowned dance artists, including Steve Paxton, Kirstie Simson, Nancy Stark-Smith, Peter Bingham, Andrew Harwood, Patrick Scully, and Angie Hauser, among many others. He has received numerous awards for his artistic work, including fellowships from the Guggenheim, the Bush and the Jerome Foundations, as well as commissions from the Walker Arts Center, Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival, Dance Theater Workshop, Bates Dance Festival, and the National Performers Network. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Let's begin. Well, hi, Chris. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah, we've known each other for quite a while, but it's always like these little in passing at little festivals or workshops or here. So I'm excited to spend a little bit more time talking with you today.
Yeah, me too.
Cool. So this is kind of the question that I ask everyone to start with, is like, how does improvisation show up in your life these days, either artistically, personally, emerging, overlapping of the two?
Well, I guess it is it shows up in all areas of my life. I really believe that most of our lives are improvised and within varying levels of constraints. But creatively, I'm continually working on creating pieces for the stage, pieces for students, and teaching improvisation. So this fall, I'm teaching a improvisation technique course, which is a little different than when I'm teaching straight up compositional improvisation for performance. It's more tilted towards movement research and the development of their physical skill. But like in my graduate courses, I weave in a lot of improvising as well.
That's interesting. I want to kind of like talk about that class a little bit for a second. Though it wasn't, I have some other questions I want to get to as well. But I've been really thinking lately is when I'm teaching what we label as contemporary technique at our university, I have been thinking about, like, what if I'm teaching technique not to train a repertory dancer, like someone's going to go join a company, but using technique to train an improviser. Like, that's the goal of the technique class, is to teach someone how to, or build someone's skills up as an improviser, as opposed to like, I've stopped like teaching phrases and because many technique classes end with a big phrase that you do and everyone loves that, and I've kind of moved away from that. So I'm curious about, like, when you think about that improv technique class, like, how do you approach that? What's the kind of things that you do in that class?
Well, first, I just want to say that I don't just target it towards people who want to improvise. I also target it to what I would, in the old days, we used to call them technical dancers. Basically, you use the word repertory, but people who are doing set choreography, because from my point of view, I've done a fair amount of set work in my life as well, and it always felt improvised. And as I said earlier, it's just that constraints are quite narrow, and the work was performed at its best when it had a kind of improvised feeling to it, even if it was said. That said, I think, I teach a liberal arts college, and in my technique courses, I have graduate students and undergraduate students. And I would say the bulk of the undergraduate students, I'm teaching them basic movement skills, I would say sort of relatively basic movement and compositional skills woven together, but I'm really tilting it towards their physical intelligence rather than making pieces.
Yeah.
For the graduate students, it's similar, although I have them, in addition to having them in this class, I also have them in a composition class. So they inform each other. And I would say that maybe half of them are interested in becoming improvised performers or performers who work with improvisation.
Yeah.
And the others, they use it all the time in their creative process.
Right. Yeah. I've seen you mention other places this idea of presence and I'm sorry, perception. And how does that play into this? Like, how does this play into this training that you're doing?
Well, I one sort of way that I approach physical skill development is the ability to solve problems that arise in the course of a class or a performance. And these problems could be both artistic or creative, but they could also just be physical. So, someone is coming at me and I have to get out of their way, or I suddenly have somebody's weight on my body and I have to manage that weight. And my way of teaching is to try to get students to think about developing repertoires of solutions, and rather than one perfect solution that they can use, I teach them to approach each situation as a unique situation, because in truth it is. My body's always changing and my environment's always changing. So if I have one solution and I can't tune it to that situation, it's pretty brittle. So those solutions come about through the interaction between perception and action. I have a situation and I have an intention to do something. As soon as I start to enact that intention, I'm getting a flood of perceptual feedback. And based on my experience and my awareness of that in that moment, I adjust, I adapt to meet the circumstances. And so for me, it's easy for students to focus on the movement to more than the perception. And I try to say that the information you need to make that movement fit that situation and fit your body is in the room and in your body, and it's your job to detect that and figure out what to do with that information. And if you're just thinking about the next thing you're going to do, you're missing that. And so, and I also try to make them aware that perception is not just something you just turn it on and you turn it off, that you actually learn over time. You become more skilled as a perceiver. Part of what, I use the term physical intelligence, and part of that is knowing where to look, so to speak, where to gather your information, because sometimes the reason someone's not successful in what they're doing is that they're just not attuned to the right information. It's there, but they're not paying attention to it. Yeah. And there's many levels of this. I'm moving and there's information I'm getting from my body about the progress of that movement, how it's affecting my organism, so to speak. Is it hurting me? Is it, am I using too much effort, or am I using not enough? And then I'm also noticing what other people are doing and trying to again, just fit it together with what they're doing so that we have the best chance to work together and collaborate and make the, I mean, I guess I would say best informed decisions. And, you know, there's no right decision. And I just want to be clear that I don't think it's useful for a student or a dancer to take this sort of macro perspective of perceiving everything. Like you often see with beginning improvisers, they're often looking around like this because they're afraid they're going to miss something. Their teacher has told them to pay attention to what's happening. And so they're keeping all the balls in the air, the space ball, the collaborator ball, the audience ball in their body. It's too much. And so you have to make choices about what to pay attention to and when to shift to something else. And dilating yourself to the maximal sort of perceptual awareness is not a practical solution for any great length of time.
Yeah. Yeah, you get kind of like overwhelmed and lost pretty quickly there.
Exactly.
Yeah. I wonder just one more thing about this, like, so could you give an example, like a really concrete example of what that looks like when you're in the classroom with the students? Like what kind of exercise are you doing to help train this? Or what kind of framework are you saying, okay, here's some directions or some constraints or some what have you, and let's try this. Is there an example that you can kind of share?
Sure. So one score that I do, I call it Where's the Center? And I have people, they're in lanes, and one person is upstage, one person is downstage. And initially, the idea is that the person downstage is trying not to be the center. And that's tricky because they're closer to the audience. And so it's very easy for them to kind of dominate in part because visually they're bigger. So you know, this is occluding that. And so and then I'll switch roles, and then I'll have them go back and I'll say, okay, the center can shift up or down. It doesn't have to be just the downstage person, but the idea is, where's the center? Like, where's the center of attention? Is it shared? Do I have it? Do you have it? And it's about sort of navigating the sort of noticing where it is and playing with that creatively to create a performance that has dynamic change and interest. And it's totally fine sometimes for there to be two centers, but if you are a performer who is kind of draws a lot of attention, it becomes harder to give it to the other person. And so you have to learn how to either disappear or modulate your energy so that you're not in the primary sort of center. And maybe you have the person who likes to be in a not in the center. And this comes up all the time in improvisation. Is some people love to be the center of attention. Some people would rather not be that. And I always say that if you have someone in an ensemble who will not take the center when it comes to them, then it puts a burden on the rest of the ensemble. And so it doesn't mean that you have to be flamboyant or make big choices that sort of say, here I am. But when so to speak, when the ball comes to you, do you pass it right away to someone else, or do you take it? And because, you know, it may be that if you're in a duet, that person's tired and they want a break, or you're in an ensemble and the dominant thing is losing energy, like it's finishing, and rather than waiting until it's ended and then what next, is like you're aware, oh, that's coming down, so I'm gonna take the space. And so you can see that these are related to personality issues, and you have to sometimes work against what is sort of your affinity.
That's great. That's a great example. Thanks. I mean, it's a nice concrete example that can also, like, very clearly, as you did, like, can expand out to this kind of conceptual framework that you're working to think about roles. I often talk about like, oh, are you initiating something? Are you supporting something? Like,
Yeah.
what's your role? And that this is another way of talking about it.
Yeah.
Or even foreground, background, and all those things. It's like, just where's the center? It kind of gets to the point really nicely.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really can be quite amazing when the person who's further away is the center,
Right.
not just always taking the person who's closest to the audience as being the center of attention. I mean,
Right.
obviously you can do things with lighting to make that happen, but it's nice if the performers have the capacity to uh, dial dial up and dial down their energy so that they can play the game, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, and that also, it just seems like there's like a whole like space in there for developing more and more capacity to do that, right? Like
Yeah,
first there's probably some really obvious answers to that problem, and then as you get more experience, there's more subtle ways of shifting that center.
exactly. Like so when you want to make yourself not the center, do you just turn yourself into a stationary rock, like you just curl up in a ball? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, that works, but that's just one way to do it.
Right.
Like if you just kept some movement going that was repetitive, eventually the audience just stops seeing it because it's just ongoing, and they start to look at other things. So there's many ways to do it, and yeah, it's fun for them um, to practice. And one of the things that in my teaching that I feel is important is that I have the students who are not performing in that score, and actually all my scores, I have them sit next to someone and they're always narrating what they're seeing to each other. And I tell the performers they're going to talk while you're performing. That's so that they can learn what someone else is seeing and they can share, because they start to realize, wow, I didn't even notice that. You're noticing something that I'm not seeing, and it sort of starts to make them aware that, oh, I tend to look for certain things, but I'm missing certain things. And so when they're in the space, they have that memory. Because I really feel like your ability to be on stage or be in the performance space and have some sense of what it looks like or how the audience might experience it comes from watching.
Yeah.
That you have to have experience doing both and talking while people are performing. I know it seems kind of sacrilegious, but I mean, when we're doing like a final showing, they don't talk. But
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
when we're working on these skills, the watching is such a critical part of this. I feel it's just much more effective if they're sharing and ask like, oh, what do you think is the center? And someone might think that's the center, but I think that's the center. And then you start wondering, oh, okay, I see where you're going with that. And
That's a great practice. I'm going to totally steal that from you, because I feel like often what happens is when you get to an end, whether it's in like a composition class or an improv class, like someone shows them and you're like, let's talk about it, and they all stare at you like they
they
don't
can't remember.
they don't have anything to say because
Yeah.
they don't have. But if they're always talking, it gives them that language to at least say, oh, I saw this.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful. You kind of brought up the idea of performing, and I definitely want to talk about this some. And earlier you mentioned constraints, and I'm really interested in what kind of constraints, just to keep using that word, people use when they're going into a performative context. And you did also mention is the difference between making work like the work you make on yourself and your colleagues and your collaborators and like the work you might make on students. But and maybe there's a line you can talk about there, a difference, but in general, just like how do you think of constraints when you're making performances?
Well, I think I think there's two ways to approach constraints. One of which is from the personal perspective, is that within each dancer, there's an element of self-direction, and there is a so like when I have open like if I'm in a performance and there's a section where I'm free to do whatever I want or to make my own choices, I tend to be a formalist, and so I pretty quickly am working with constraints that I just create for myself. I mean, it's not like I just come up with them off the top of my head. I have a sort of rolling series of what I would call subscores, practices that I'm interested in that I find fruitful in my own research, and so I can activate them. Like if I feel like sometimes I don't need anything, like what's happening is so interesting and so full of information that I just go. But sometimes it's like I feel a sense of like I want more structure to what I'm doing, and so I'll call forward something I've been working on, and because and I teach my students how to do this because a big part of performing is coping with the performance situation. And so there is some element of stress. There's less, the more you do it, I think there's less stress, at least for me. And if you don't practice being in that stressful situation where you know people are watching you and you're having to make it up on the spot, if you don't put yourself in that situation repeatedly, you often just resort to very stereotyped ways of responding to that stress. One of which can be that you never look at the audience. Another thing could be that you just move all the time, like you forget to be still. You're not managing the syntax of what you're doing. You just like do stuff. So trying to think of it. All right, so you were talking about constraints. So let me give you some examples because it seems pretty abstract.
Yeah.
So one constraint that I've been working with that I really have had a lot of pleasure and enjoyment from doing it, both for myself and for my students, is this score that I call becoming undetermined. And so the idea of this score is that as you get an image of an action or of a something that's about to happen, that you feel yourself launching into the inaction of that idea, of asking yourself, how determined am I to realize this image or this intention, and can I become less determined? It's not that I just say, with many improvisers, there's this sort of don't, whatever the first impulse is, don't do that, do second or third or fourth. And I find that to be a bit too blunt of an instrument. I think sometimes the first choice is the best choice, but just ask him, and so maybe I'm doing the thing that I imagine, but I'm fulfilling it, I start to look for opportunities to make it less predetermined, so to speak. And so that's a score that I work on. Another score would be that I track the dorsal and ventral surfaces of my body, and I compose with the topography of dorsal and ventral. The dorsal is the sort of back side of my body. It's not quite just, it's a little bit more complex than that. But the ventral surfaces are the more vulnerable front parts of your body. And often, so that ventral dorsal proportions are useful to get a dancer thinking about, because it gets them revealing themselves in ways that are less, because if you're afraid, you're going to just do mostly dorsal. You're going to hide from the audience. You're rarely going to open up for the audience to see you. So I will say in this section, I would like you to work with proportions of dorsal and ventral. So it's pretty loose, but it's specific.
Yeah, that's great. Is there, or are there any examples of like, I I mean, you could give those to a group and they would be working on it together. But are there any kind of more like group score constraints that you might offer?
Sure.
Clearly, focused on like group organization or something like that.
Sure. So one score that I love to do, and this comes from Barbara Dilley, is she calls it finding unison. And basically the my understanding of the score and how I use it, and so if it's different than this, I apologize to Barbara. But the idea is that you're not trying to do sort of straight up flocking. You're noticing what's happening around you, and you're making choices to find unison. But as always happens, there's turbulence in that. And you see it when birds are flocking. Some bird goes over here and then they come back. The idea is if you go away from the flock, it's fine. There's nothing to be worried about. It could be that you create a new flock, but it could be that when you're done with what you're doing, you just fold back in. And it's about finding it rather than holding on to it. Another score that I do is I will create a field of people in the space who are standing, and I call it a field of emergent gestures where they're standing. And often I'll start a performance like this, or not too often, but I've done this a few times, where they don't move through space very much. They pretty much have this idea that the space around them is their laboratory, and they're waiting to be moved, and they're enacting a gesture. And that gesture doesn't have to be one movement. It could be, I'm gonna turn around, or I'm gonna go down to the floor and come back up. So it could unfold in time. It doesn't have to just be one like short, and in that score, it is not really about any one individual. It's about the whole. It's like what it looks like to watch people doing that.
Yeah.
So in that, I would say I don't want them interacting with each other. So even though they're right next to, they can notice each other. But I often will use the image of like, when you're writing a letter at a cafe and you happen to see the person next to you and maybe you nod to them, but you don't just start co-writing the letter, or you don't write to them. You keep going with what you're doing. But you might incorporate in the letter that, oh, I saw this person and they have a cute dog and an interesting hat. So it's not like you have blinders on, but you are generating your own material. You're not dialoguing with someone else.
Yeah, that's great. That was really helpful, just to kind of, I like, it's like I've been talking to all these people about improv and like hearing like concrete examples of kind of what they do. I just I find really helpful to like ground the more, theoretical ideas that we're all kind of juggling with. And thinking about theoretical ideas, I was looking up a little bit about what I could find about you, and some things that your bio that I found. I'm going to kind of just this little quote that like one thing that you're interested in right now is the eco-poetic model of creativity and ethical behavior. And there's a lot in there, and there was more in the bio, but
Sure.
I think this seems like really important to kind of like, I would love to hear more about what this is for you and what this research and interest is.
Sure. First, I'll talk about the eco-poetic model, which is the ecological realm and the poetic realms are, from my point of view, are completely intertwined. In an ecological is the context that we are situated within, both inside of our body and outside of our body, and with the beings that we're engaging with. And as you can imagine, the way that you are aware of those things and are attuning to them is through perception. And I came up with that idea of bringing ecology and poetics together is because when I first started studying composition, I didn't go to school for dance as an undergrad. I was an English major. So I felt like at about, 30, I had been making dances and I'd never taken a composition class. I'd made lots of dances and rehearsed a lot and been in companies and so forth. But I thought I should take a course, or I should study composition. So I started reading everything I could about dance composition. And in those days, there was far less written about that than there is now. And I remember reading Doris Humphrey's book, The Art of Making Dances, which was kind of a classic. And she said at one point that she thought of the theater or the studio as an empty space waiting to be filled with your creativity. And I always tell my students that I threw the book out the window when she said that, because that's completely the opposite of how I think. I think there's so much going on in the space, even if it's empty. There's all the history. There's the dynamic shifting of the light, the color, the surface of the floor, and all the history that's gone on in that room. And so I felt that to be skilled as an improviser, or even a dance maker, one wanted to develop one's skills at being able to be in dialogue with what is happening, both inside of you and what's happening around and outside of you. In terms of citizenship, I think of improvising and performance as an opportunity for me to enact my beliefs about how people should be in community and how we treat each other. And because it's improvised, situations come up that are unpredictable, and sometimes you make choices that are that make your collaborators unhappy, or God forbid hurt them. You have a collision or something like that, and so you find yourself arguing sometimes, or having to say that you're sorry, and or maybe not during the performance, but afterwards. But I'm very aware when I'm on stage of issues of gender and race and identity, and so I'm cognizant of the image of what I'm doing, and I feel a sense of responsibility that what I'm doing aligns with who I am and what I believe in. And I was very inspired when I was young, and still am actually, by the feminist sort of manifesto that the personal is political. And so what you do in your personal life is a political act. And there's few things more intimate than improvising with someone on stage. It's like you're out there together, and sort of the cardinal rule I have, if there was any rule, is that when the performance starts, we're in it together. Like nobody gets to just check out. And if you're unhappy about something, that doesn't give you the right to just leave. And I feel a sense of responsibility, even if I'm not happy with what's going on, to hang in there, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. But to just abandon someone because I don't like what they're doing or what's happening does not feel responsible to me. And also, I spend a lot of time when I'm coaching and directing and this is getting at the ecology again, but it's also at the citizenry, which is, I ask them, why are you asking people to watch you? Why are you creating a performance situation where they're paying money or they're devoting their time to see you perform? The assumption is that there is a role for them to play. And I feel that it's my job and my responsibility to, in some way, let the audience know that I appreciate that they're there, and that without them, it wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. And how do you do that? There's a formula for how you do that. But if you never look at the audience, they get the sense that you're having your own experience. I seek to transcend solipsism, being in my own bubble. I want to be in dialogue with the audience in a way that is not asking them to like me or love me or respect me, but I'm in dialogue with their attention. And so sometimes you're in a performance and you think you're the center, to go back to what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. And you look up at the audience, you realize they're looking at something over there. And you're like, oh, they're not even looking at what I'm doing. That gives you an opportunity to make a different choice, because now you're not the center, so I can just exit. I don't have to finish something if the world has already changed, and the world that I was in, as wonderful as it might have been, is done, and they're on to something else. And so I feel like attending to their attention is it's just a way of being responsible, that we need each other. And I want them to feel their agency, both, like, I don't want to manipulate them into you have to look at this, or you have to look at that. And like, I want them to feel free to look wherever they want to look, and to have their own experience. But at the same time, I'm not abdicating my capacity to have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Yeah, no, it is. It's great. It feels like there's like this great balance between this idea of freedom and responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Like you have all this freedom within this improvisational context, even if there's some constraints or scores or scripts or structures or whatever word you like to use. And there's also responsibility for the thing that's happening and to each other. And I mean, that is kind of like the ideal world, right? That we all feel like we are free, but we also accept the responsibility of making sure everyone else is free as well.
Yeah. And, I think for freedom is a very interesting concept today and forever, but
Totally.
it is not just about my freedom. It's about our shared freedom. And sometimes my freedom might impinge on someone else's freedom. And so I need to modulate that, or we need to negotiate that. If everyone is just following their bliss or following their desire to be free, it often is either chaotic or it's not connected. Everyone's doing their own thing. And so, I am very much inspired by the phrase degrees of freedom, which it comes from Nikolai Bernstein, who's a physiologist. But it's true both in terms of neurology, but in terms of as a performer, I'm modulating the degrees of freedom. How free do I allow myself to be in certain, sometimes I'll be in a performance, especially when I'm in a bigger ensemble. I find that I'm inhibiting a lot. I'm not generating a lot of material. I'm coordinating with what people are doing, and I'm not trying to elbow people out of my way so that I can do my thing. And obviously, when there's fewer people on stage, there is more freedom to pursue your own thread, so to speak. Yeah, and I think of that as something that we need as a society. Is so much emphasis on freedom and so little care on how your actions impact others. So I want to be free to drill for oil on my property, to blast music as loud as I want, whenever I want, to just do whatever, and the truth is, if everyone does that, then it really erodes the social fabric. And restraint is a skill, and it's a compassionate act. It's not a squelching of you as an individual. Yeah. It's about we can do more together if we all modulate our freedom, so to speak.
Yeah, that was really, really beautifully said. And I just love the idea of having this responsibility to the other performers, having the responsibility to the audience. And I'm curious about your thoughts about because you talked about the audience can choose where to look. So they have some, again, we'll just keep using this word freedom of where to put their attention, but what is their responsibility in that context as well? Because they would have,
what is the audience's responsibility?
Yeah, like they have the freedom to move their attention where they are so drawn, but what's their response? What's their responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think that their responsibility is, and I use this, loosely in, they're not signing a contract,
Yeah.
but that what they bring is their presence and their attention. And so if they're on their phone or they're just falling asleep, I mean, sometimes people fall asleep because they're really tired, but sometimes people, they'll choose to sit in the front row and just take a nap, like during a performance. And I feel like that's not responsible behavior.
They can
Like if
stretch
you're
their
gonna,
legs out in the front row, right? So they,
yeah,
yeah,
that that's not a responsible choice from my point of view. If you know you're in the front row and the performer can see you, maybe don't fall asleep.
yeah,
Pinch yourself, do what you got to do to stay awake. Um, but so I was in a performance once where the audience started throwing things at the performers. They were throwing their programs like they were they folded, somebody did it, and then more and more people. And I felt that was disrespectful. I felt like they were just proving that they had power. And it had nothing to do with what we were doing on stage, and more to do with showing how free they were to transgress that fourth wall. And so I think it's okay for audiences to talk, to yell, to laugh, to cry. They're free to do a lot of different things, but my hope is that they're considerate that this person is offering something, and it's good to try to give them your attention during that performance, even if you don't like it. Because maybe your attention will be the thing that helps them grow from that performance, even if you didn't like it.
yeah, yeah. That's right on. I mean, we certainly talk to our students a lot about when they watch performances, whether on video or live. It's like it's not always about whether you like it or not. It's like what's the experience of it. And I was actually, quick tangent, in June I took 12 students to Paris for 2 weeks.
Wow.
To camping, which is this big festival for undergrad students that happen there. And just coincidence, Pina Bausch's company was performing in Paris at the same time. Wow. So we bought tickets and we all went. And it was Bluebeard. I don't know if you're familiar with Bluebeard, but it's like rape and murders and
no.
And she's so relentless, right? She doesn't let you get off easily on these things.
No.
And most of the students just hated it. Of course, we were like way up in the balcony too, so we were really far away because the cost.
So they could express their dissatisfaction without worrying too much that anyone's going to notice on stage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And it was hot because it was like 95 degrees in Paris, and of course, these old theaters barely have air conditioning and all this stuff. So it was just kind of really tough for them, and it was like talking to them about, okay, I understand that it was a really hard it was hard for me to watch, like it made me uncomfortable, all this stuff, but let's broaden our view of what it is, and how we can be with it and experience it and appreciate it and learn from it. But that's sometimes certainly more challenging sometimes than others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've walked out of performances that I just couldn't take after a while. And I'll hang in there as long as I can. And there's a point at which it's like, okay, I've done my time. This is not getting better. And even though this is a very famous piece or a very famous choreographer, this is not how I want to be spending my time. Yeah. And I respect that. I think audiences should be able to boo if they want to boo. I don't like them when they throw things. I think that's not a good thing. But I'll give the choreographer time to try to win me over, so to speak. And if I'm having difficulty, I try to think about why is this hard for me? Why do I not like this? And if it's because I feel that there's a narcissism in the performing, that's when I'm more likely to want to leave. When I feel like this isn't about an exchange between me and them. This is about them. And they're saying, look at me and look what I can do. And if somebody's making an effort to try to connect, I can usually hang in there.
Yeah. That's probably right on for me as well. So I guess one last question, like thinking about all of these kind of elements that we brought up in terms of improvising and performing and teaching and stuff like that. And what about this practice like keeps you interested in it and like sustains you? Like you've been doing this focus on improvisation for quite a while now.
Yeah. Over 4 decades.
Yeah. And what's the thing that keeps this so vital in your life?
Well, I guess I would say there's 2 things, or 2 big categories of things. The most important thing is I love the relationships that I have developed through making work and performing the work. It's no accident that I chose an art form that was social or interactive with other people. And I set my career up so that I could have a series of collaborators around the world who I would sort of episodically connect with over the years. So I might see them once a year, twice, 2 or 3 times a year for 30 years. And I might go a year where I don't see them at all. And but then when we reconnect, there's this sense of who are they at this point? What have they been doing? What's important to them now? And I love learning about their personal lives and sort of the sharing, so that when we're dancing, I see them as a full human being that I care about and that I know something about. So when I'm looking at them as we're performing and in a particular situation, I know where they're at emotionally or psychically, and there's a richness to that makes the work much more than just about movement.
Yeah,
it's theater, and I don't try to make things theatrical. They just are. It's human beings performing on stage. It's inherently theatrical, and so for that reason, it has been so rewarding to have these relationships, both with my collaborators and with my students. I mean, I always tell my students, if I thank you at the end of a dance, it's not just because I'm being nice. It's like, I never assume that I'm going to have endless more dances. So if I say thank you, it's like that actually meant something to me. And the other thing I wanted to say is really about my own curiosity and my own imagination, and my fascination in the research of perception and imagination and movement. I don't need very much to get interested in movement and perception and imagination. It's like it's endlessly fascinating. Here it is, I'm 62 and I still am learning things about my body. And well, obviously our bodies are always changing, but even things that I had years ago that maybe I hadn't researched, and I discover, oh, wow, the movement feels different now. And I always tell people that improvising and dancing is the thing in life that makes me feel most alive. And I like performing because the stakes are higher. I like the focalizing effect of an audience and in the performance situation. It keeps me focused. I know for the next hour, this is what I'm going to be doing. And it requires all of my attention. And, we live in a world where your attention can be scattered in so many different ways. Just think about how hard it is to carve out an hour to just do one thing.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult these days. And dancing and improvising it's just incredibly rich. And there's a sense of you get to build and develop relationships, and you get to see yourself in relationship with others, and you get to practice. You get to change how you behave, so that, like, if you notice, oh, I keep doing this thing, how can I change? I like what you're doing, your way of relating to others. And so I learned from others. If I was just doing solos, I wouldn't learn all that. And I give incredible credit to all the collaborators I've had over the years. They've taught me so much, and made me aware that we're all different, and we can learn from each other. And learning from someone doesn't mean you become them. You take something from what they're doing and you make it your own. And I think that's an incredible model for being in community, that we share and we help each other, and we say we're sorry when we mess up, and yeah. So.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, Chris. That was wonderful. I love hearing you talk about improvisation. I always have. I remember other times, having conversations or hearing you talk about it. You're always so thoughtful and insightful into the practice. So I really appreciate sharing this time with you this morning.
Well, I feel the same way. And I just have loved watching you perform over the years. And, you're someone that I see, maybe every 4 or 5 years. And the last time I saw you perform, or last couple of times I saw you perform, I was just amazed at how your movement continues to develop in its richness and maturity, and your compositional sensibility just keeps it. It's like wine. That's been getting better with age. So
yeah, I'm definitely getting old enough to be called wine, I think. Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, you too. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Chris Aiken. I'm always drawn to his conceptual frameworks and how he is able to ground them in a tangible physical practice. Please check out the show notes for links to Chris out in the world, or at least out on the web. And also, please subscribe to Act React. You can find us on YouTube, Apple and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or Podbean, as well as Vimeo. I hope you're able to join me for the next couple episodes. And until then, please take care, be well, and live spontaneously.